Thank you, Pete. I'll start with a promise, actually. The last time I spoke in the meeting about 9 or 10 months ago, I spoke for about an hour. Most of that was PowerPoint. So I'm endeavouring not to speak for an hour. It would be significantly shorter than that. Hopefully the message that I have today is quite simple. I'm not going to bring death by PowerPoint. So relax a little bit. In fact, the message that I'd like to bring today is really very simple, and it's covered by this one verse. I'll just display it briefly for you. It's from Psalm 119, which is a psalm that's basically a huge celebration of the law. That it's people that have sat together, put together this poem, this psalm, and they've put together an amazing psalm where you have each letter of the Hebrew alphabet is the focus of each kind of stanza of this psalm, and it's going on and on and on about the glory and the amazing things that people see in the law of God and the righteousness of God and these wonderful things. And the response in this verse is just an admission that there is nothing that they can do in order to actually keep these wonderful testimonies that God has given, except that God allows them to, God enables them to. It says, in your steadfast love, give me life, that I may keep the testimonies of your mouth. And that's my message today, really. Give me life. In your loving kindness, give me life, that I can live this life that you've called me to live. So, not to be outdone by Matt Chapman. I probably will be outdone by Matt Chapman, but that's fine. I've got my own visual aid that I'd like to use. You can probably see behind me some beautiful flowers that these are Priscilla's. To my shame, she bought them herself, and I need to get my act together, really. But anyway, this is the visual aid, really. The flowers, in some respects, are like people, and the Bible does compare people to flowers in many different ways. But when you buy flowers and you take a flower and you cut it from the branch that it's attached to, there's always a kind of a cost benefit weighing up. That you get to take the beauty home with you. You get to put it in a vase. You get to put it in a pride place in a home. But the moment you do it, it begins to die. And that's kind of, I'm not telling you anything that you don't know. This is the way things work. But actually, I could now put this in a vase. It doesn't matter what I do to it. I can extend it a little bit. I can maybe put plant food in the water. I can refresh the water each day. I can put it in fresh air and sunlight, but it's going to die. In fact, it's already begun. And actually, people are like this. The moment that they are disconnected from the source of life, they begin to die. And in Genesis chapter 3, when God says to Adam and Eve, in the opening chapters, he says, the day that you eat the fruit of this tree, you will surely die. And there was probably no physical change immediately. They didn't just drop dead on the floor, but their disconnection when they disobeyed God from the source of all life immediately put the writing on the wall, really. And as people, we cannot live this life that God's called us to without that reconnection to God. So this is another one that we've kept. This is from previous week's shot. You can see it's beginning to kind of dry out and curl up a little bit. And if you go back even further, this was 3 weeks ago. We've got this one here. It's dropping leaves all over the house. I think Priscilla's ready to put it in the bin, really. But this is the point. It doesn't matter what I do to it. You can sing to it. I guess I could pray for it. I could stay up all night and talk to it. I could read its stories. I could do all kinds of things to it. It won't make any difference. It will die. And let me just move my camera slightly. I could even put it in a jar like this and pop it in there. Some of you will recognize the Disney Beauty and the Beast here. I can put it in a jar and cover it like this. I kind of spend the whole of the time just protecting it and not allowing anyone to get close to it. A bit like the Beast in Beauty. Sorry, it's locked down, and we went for Disney Plus. I'm ashamed to say, but it's just hanging on to it, trying to maintain the life that it once was. Will do no good at all. It won't extend its life by a moment. And yet sometimes we can try and do exactly that. We can try and preserve the air in which it first flowered. We can try and not let anything change or get back to the circumstances where there was once life. And we can do that ourselves sometimes. We can look back to a time maybe when we first blossomed and bloomed in our relationship with God, or that, and kind of try and recreate the circumstances that led to it. And we can certainly learn a lot from the circumstances that lead to revival and blessing and wonderful times with God. But ultimately, if that's all we're doing, this is it. We're just trying to protect it, but it won't do any good, because really this flower has had it, unless it's reconnected with the source of life that originally gave it its life, it's dead. And actually, in the same way, we can't live the life either. It doesn't matter how wonderfully we once blossomed. What matters is, are we connected to the source of life that gave the life in the first place? And so it's not about the fruit, it's about the source. And if covering it in a jar like that, I'm focusing on the fruit and not the source. It's the source of life that's the answer to living the life that God's called us to. Just like in that psalm that I showed you at the beginning, that Lord, give me life that I might walk in the way of your testimonies. And this is why Christianity is not a religion. It's not primarily a rule for living or a set of guidelines or principles. Christianity is about reconnecting to the source of life, about the message that how you can do it, how it's been made possible, and how you remain in that position of connectedness to life. And it's wonderful. So I'd like to share with you something that I put together actually about 13 or 14 years ago. So we're back to the PowerPoint, but don't worry, not for too long. And it's based on a part of the Bible that people don't often talk about very often. Just trying to work out how to do this. There we go. I'd like to talk about Ezekiel's Temple just for a moment. Now, as I say, 13, 14 years ago, I had a lot of time through the summer holiday. Don't let anyone ever tell you that teachers have too much holiday. And I decided to take one of the Psalms a bit too literally, maybe, where it says, walk around Jerusalem, count her towers and measure her bulwarks, something like that. So I literally did that by building Ezekiel's Temple using 3D software. So if anyone asks you, will Ezekiel's Temple ever be built, you can tell them Andrew Green has already done it. So if that changes your end times understanding, then I apologize. But honestly, it's not quite finished. I've missed out the kitchens in the corners and one of the central kitchens as well. But it's basically 3D outline. There's lots that you can learn from Ezekiel's Temple. I'm going to give you like a really short walkthrough, just to whet your appetite, really. We could spend loads and loads of time on this, and then try and get back to the main the main thing I want to talk about today. So just a few things to point out. You'll notice that there are sixes all over this this plan. So you have in the middle, hopefully you can see the pointer, you have the temple itself, and you have in the center here, you have the altar, and then you have 3 inner gateways and 3 outer gateways. So you've got 6 gateways in total. Inside each gateway, you have 6 kind of porticos or 6 kind of sections that I'll show you in a second. You have 6 kitchens. You can see them a bit more clearly there. The wall is 6 cubits high and 6 cubits long, and it kind of goes on and on and on. There are 6s all over it, or multiples of 6s, and it kind of gives you a clue as to what's going on with this temple. That just maybe the purpose of this vision for Ezekiel was to outline the life and ministry of a man. Anyway, now when people, so there's the gateway, it's in a little bit more detail there. You can see these kind of, there are 3 on this side and 3 on the other side, these sections. You can see on the gate posts that are decorated with palm trees, and elsewhere you have cherubim, which kind of remind us back to Eden, which we said at the beginning how Adam and Eve lost through disobedience to God. And it's quite odd in some ways. If I just go back, you can see that the gate posts are really high, well above the gateways, and that's probably because the doors to the entrances would be meant to be raised. They wouldn't open and close outwards like many of ours that we're used to. They would actually just be raised within the gateposts, and it kind of links back to one of the Psalms. It says, "Lift up your heads, O ye gates." Probably a reference to the gates literally being lifted up so that the King of Glory could come in. But anyway, let's keep moving through this. So when pilgrims would come, according to the instructions in Ezekiel, it's from chapter 40, they would either come in through the north gateway, which is up here, or they'd come into the south gateway down at the bottom. The temple faces east, and you have gateways going east as well, but they weren't allowed to use those. We'll come back to those in a moment. And you weren't allowed to come in the same way that you left. I said that the wrong way around. You weren't allowed to leave the same way that you came in. If you came in through the north gateway, you come into the inner section, and then you'd leave through the south gateway. And if you came in through the south gateway, you'd leave through the north gateway. So no one left the same way that they arrived, which is also quite interesting. Now let's focus on some of these inner gateways. You can see here, there's the temple and kind of the 3 levels of wooden rooms that sat on the sides of it. And you can see the altar in the middle. We'll get to that shortly. But here you have the gateway itself, and I think it was 12 tables that were around the outside. I can't actually remember the number actually. And the tables here were for the preparation of the meat as part of the sacrifices. So you had the utensils laid out, and the tables for preparing the animals that had been brought for slaughter and for sacrifice. And if we zoom in, you can see them a bit more closely. Now, the priests didn't wear khaki shorts and Liverpool shirts. I apologise. It's just to give you some sense of the scale of what's described in Ezekiel. But notice these hooks. These are explicitly stated in Ezekiel around the outside that were to hang the meat on after it had been prepared. So there's a sense in which, as people entered into the holy place inside, they were literally walking through a wall of meat, or a gateway of flesh, which again will hopefully kind of ring lots of bells for many of you from your knowledge of the New Testament, particularly the book of Hebrews. And And then in the center, you have the altar. It's this huge, absolutely gigantic bronze altar that stood in front of the entrance. That this is the threshold to the temple itself. And notice that the steps, I've kind of got it the wrong way around here, but the steps faced east. Okay, now the eastern gateways could only be used by one person, and it is very, very specific in Ezekiel, in the vision that God gives Ezekiel. He says the eastern gateway is only to be used by the prince. And so the prince, once a year, the gate would be opened to the prince, the east gate. It's interesting that the entrance to Eden faced east. And he would enter, and he'd walk through these images of palm trees and cherubim. But for the prince, as he entered, unlike anyone else, what stood between him and the threshold to the temple was this altar and the steps facing east towards the prince. And he would enter, and he would, according to the vision, would make sacrifices and enter the temple. And he would do this once a year, which kind of reminds us, doesn't it, of the ministry of the high priest, who once a year would go into the temple. And it also shows us that anyone else who came to bring sacrifice on this altar were only really walking in the footsteps of the prince, for whom the steps were really there for. That they would walk in the footsteps of the prince, up these steps that faced east, and make their sacrifices as well. No one was making a sacrifice that had not been already made by this prince. Now, we could take a major detour here and make some of these obvious links with the ministry of Jesus. But I'd like to focus part of today's message really on the final thing that's described regarding this temple, apart from the allocation of the land. It talks about something really, really strange that's going on. And it's unusual, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, in that there's, in all of the other descriptions of the tabernacle and the temple of Solomon and these other temples that are built in the Old Testament, nothing living really comes out, except for the people who come in and out, the priests that go in and out to do the ministry. Nothing living comes out of those temples, but something living comes out of this temple. And it starts here by the threshold of the temple, and it flows east, and it goes around the altar, and it flows around the altar, out through this inner door, out past the cherubim, and out past the trees. It flows east, and it flows out of the main entrance, the eastern gateway to the temple. And it's a river of living water. I'd just like to read to you from, this is Ezekiel chapter 47, if you want to turn to it. Ezekiel chapter 47, just the first 9 verses. Just maybe while some of you are turning to it, just to point out that if anybody except the priests went into the temple, in terms of the other temple or the tabernacles that were built by Moses, Solomon and others, and touched these things without being sanctified, made holy and set apart to touch these things, they would immediately die. They would be put to death, and if they're in the temple itself. And yet here is something holy and living coming out of the temple. And in my mind's eye, I imagine, perhaps as a parent, I imagine a parent just hearing these reports, and there's something coming out of the temple. There's water. There's water coming out of the temple. Yeah, your kids are playing in it. And it'd be like, immediately, the alarm bells would go off. It'd be like, get them out. Get them out. There's something holy coming out of the temple. It's lethal. Don't let them touch it. Don't let them touch it. And yet, God's message to Ezekiel is exactly the opposite. We'll read it now. Just give you a break from the PowerPoint for a moment. So Ezekiel chapter 47, from verse 1. Then he brought me out to the door of the temple, and there was water flowing from under the threshold of the temple toward the east, for the front of the temple faced east. The water was flowing from under the right side of the temple, south of the altar. He brought me out by way of the north gate and led me around on the outside to the outer gateway that faces east, and there was water running out on the right side. And when the man went out to the east with the line in his hand, he measured 1,000 cubits, and he brought me through the waters. The water came up to my ankles. Now, there's only one way that Ezekiel can know that. He's walked into it. That's how he knows that it comes up to his ankles. This probably angelic being who's talking him through the vision has said, Ezekiel, get in, measure it. Again, verse 4, he measured 1,000 and brought me through the waters. The water came up to my knees. Again, he measured 1,000, brought me through. The water came up to my waist. Again, he measured 1,000, and it was a river that I could not cross, for the water was too deep, water in which one must swim, a river that could not be crossed. He said to me, Son of man, have you seen this? Then he brought me and returned me to the bank of the river. When I returned there, along the bank of the river were very many trees on one side and the other. Then he said to me, This water flows through the eastern region, goes down into the valley, and enters the sea. When it reaches the sea, its waters are healed, and it shall be that every living thing that moves, wherever the rivers go, will live. Let's read that last bit again. It shall be that every living thing that moves, wherever the rivers go, will live. It's a wonderful, wonderful picture. Last couple of slides, and then I'll be through the PowerPoint. Good. So here's a map of the I'll call it the Holy Land. I guess Israel and the territories. And you can see up in the north, you have the Sea of Galilee, where lots of Jesus' ministry took place. And here you have some of the tribal areas labeled. And then down here, you have the Jordan Valley, the River Jordan flowing down from the Sea of Galilee. And it arrived in the Dead Sea, which I believe, I should have checked this, is one of the lowest places on earth. It's way below sea level. And because there's nowhere for water to drain to, it just gathers more and more salt. And some of you will know that if you go and swim in the Dead Sea, it's so salty that you're much more buoyant than normal. So you kind of float right at the top of the water. It looks very strange in photographs. I've not been. But also because it's so salty, there's nothing living in it. It's not called the Dead Sea for no reason. But here, if we zoom in a bit, you can see Jerusalem just on the left there. And if we zoom in a bit more, you can see Jerusalem. And if you go directly east from Jerusalem, you come to the point where the Jordan River empties into the Dead Sea. And in the vision that Ezekiel has, this river that no one can cross flows out from the temple, flows east into the Jordan and into the Dead Sea. And to read it again, every living thing that moves, wherever the rivers go, will live. And it flows down to the Dead Sea and makes the dead things living, and brings life and all of these wonderful things. So the invitation to Ezekiel was to get in, and he found that it was uncontainable, irrepressible quantities of living water that brought life to everything that it touched. And the invitation, it wasn't bringing death, it was bringing life to everywhere that it went. Now, many of you will be aware of these, but I'm going to go through them because They're so wonderful. The references to living water in the New Testament. I'm just going to pick out 3 in John's Gospel. I'll go through them very quickly. The first, of course, is the first that I'm going to refer to is the woman at the well, where Jesus tells the woman at the well that she can have living water. Jesus would have been well aware of the vision of Ezekiel in his what he was saying here. I just read, so this is John chapter 4, verses 13 to 14. It says, Jesus answered her and said to her, whoever drinks of this water will thirst again. That's the water in the well. But whoever drinks of the water that I give him will never thirst. But the water that I give him will become in him a fountain of water, springing up into everlasting life. And a few chapters later, Jesus is in Jerusalem. He said that he wasn't going to go to Jerusalem for the feast, but he's gone later secretly. And it's like he can't hold back any longer. He's kind of watching everything that's going on. No one's recognized him. And then in John chapter 7:37, he says, on the last and that great day of the feast, Jesus stood up. He couldn't contain himself anymore and cried out, saying, is anyone thirsty? Let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. But this he spoke concerning the Spirit, whom those believing in him would receive. So, for the Holy Spirit was not yet given, because Jesus was not yet glorified. Is anyone thirsty? Come to me and drink. And now beginning to see that this is not just some ethereal kind of spiritual experience. This is the third person of the Trinity. This is God the Holy Spirit flowing from the hearts of people who come to him. Anyone who thirsts. Okay, and so let's go to the third one very quickly. John chapter 15. Going back to our flower metaphor, maybe. Just going to read verses 4 to 5. This whole section is relevant, really. Jesus is explaining in advance how his disciples are going to live, how they're going to be fruitful, and how they are going to walk the life to which they've been called. So verse 4, abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit, for without me you can do nothing. And done a bit of a circle, haven't we? We're back to branches and fruit. That if you want to be fruitful, you need to be connected to me, says Jesus. You cannot do it. You cannot live this life unless, back in the Psalm, unless I give you life in my loving kindness, unless I give you life, you cannot live this life. You cannot walk in my testaments. You can't do it. And I'm not asking you to without this. So you have this wonderful picture again, these different pictures that Jesus uses of this living water that flows in such abundance from the very presence of God that we are invited to jump into, to drink from, to have flow from within us, or to be connected to in these different pictures that the scriptures use. And so how does the water get to us? By connecting to its source. And this again is why Christianity is not a religion. So many people, and actually it's so easy for us to do, so easy for me to do, is to mistake cause and effect. Okay, the cause is our connection to Jesus. It's the only thing that can make us fruitful. The effect may be a blossoming of love for God. It may be fruitfulness in works. It may be multitudes coming to Christ. It may be a transformed family. There are so many wonderful effects of the life of Jesus, but it's not the cause. And like that thing that I did with the jar over the plant, if we try and protect the fruit, it will still die unless it's connected to Jesus, unless we are connected to Jesus. The only way. It's the only way. It's not recreating the conditions that first brought life, except the connection to the source of life itself, and that's Jesus. So it's our connection. It's not our fruitfulness. It's his strength and our weakness. Jars of clay that contain this treasure, his earthen vessels. So the antidote, if you like, to fulfilling the works of the flesh is nowhere is it described as fulfilling the works of the Spirit. The antidote to fulfilling the works of the flesh is to walk in the Spirit, to walk in connection with Jesus, to live in connection with Jesus. Nowhere, unless I'm very much mistaken, are we told that don't fulfill the works of the flesh, do the works of the Spirit. We are told, do not walk in the Spirit, and you will not fulfill the works of the flesh. This is the calling to which we are called. Does that involve works? Well, yes, of course it does. But they flow from this connection to Jesus. And the verses that Pete read right at the beginning of the meeting today, that we are called to live for him, to live for Jesus. We live unto him, we live for him. And Chrissy as well talked about how, what will we have to show for our life? But there's no shortcut. There's no shortcut. We have to trust him and leave it to him. I was thinking something very similar to what Chrissy said a year ago in March, when I think I probably had COVID. I think it went through the school like wildfire. I don't know for a fact, but I think I did. And I had this chesty cough that I couldn't shift. And I was sitting in the bedroom thinking, God, is this it? Is this it? It's my opportunity to shine for you. It's my opportunity to be fruitful. It's my opportunity to make my name. Is it finished? Is this it? And if it is, I've not. I feel like I've not started. And just God brought me back. It's about me. That's Jesus talking. It's about me. Be connected to me. Leave it to me. I'm responsible. I'm responsible for making your light shine. I'm responsible for making your righteousness shine like the noonday. You have to lay aside everything else. Connect yourself to me, and I will take care of everything else. Trust me, and I can make your I can make your life worth living. I can make your life of consequence to others and in the kingdom of God. But connect yourself to me. So, a few takeaways. I'll be finished not too long now. A few takeaways that for me right now, the most important question in my life, I suspect it will remain the most important question in my life, is how do I remain connected to Jesus? How do I remain connected to the source of life? I can't believe that it's a once and for all thing. I believe that salvation in most cases, I don't want to get into that big argument about once saved, always saved, but that is something that's done and is very difficult. If it's possible, very, very difficult to undo. But that daily connection with Jesus, I know from my own experience, is not something that I always have lived with. And I need it because I cannot be fruitful in my life. So how do I stay connected? I can have the doctrine, I can have the preaching, I can have everything right, but if I don't have this connection with God, then I cannot be fruitful. So a few takeaways that hopefully are helpful to me, hopefully will be helpful to you. Firstly, that learning how to be connected to Jesus is a lifetime. I'd love to give you the 3-point answer, but actually that is discipleship. Okay, Jesus over that life will show us more and more how to live in fellowship with him and connection with him. It's there are no shortcuts, and why I can't give you 3 takeaways, a 3-point plan, is because Jesus will be discipling every one of us who is walking with him in different ways about how to connect with him and be rooted and grounded in him, in all kinds of different ways in our lives. But it involves everything. It can involve our work, it can involve our relationships with other people, it can involve our personal devotions to God, it can involve our dwelling in the scriptures, it can involve prayer, it can involve our engagement with the poor and needy or the lost. There are so many things, and Jesus knows what that is for you. And if we're listening to him, we'll have some idea of what he's working on in our own lives at the moment. But let's be faithful to the process. Where is Jesus leading us into closer relationship with him at this moment? The other takeaway is that this source of life, this is a real encouragement to me. This source of life is not some ethereal kind of cosmic force that we sometimes tap into when we're in the right frame of mind. That kind of thinking can destroy, actually, for me, any enjoyment I have in spending time with Jesus, because I just rate my time with God as a scale of 1 to 10 in kind of how holy I feel walking out of it. And that is not it. This source of life is not some kind of stream of cosmic consciousness. It's a person. It's a person. That river of living water that flowed from the temple is just one more facet of the life and ministry of Jesus Christ, the same one who lived and walked on the earth 2,000 years ago, who revealed himself to you and led you to salvation. It's the same person. He is the source of life, and he's very real, and you maybe know him better than you realize, if you've kind of been waylaid into kind of thinking that it's some kind of this strange power thing. Another takeaway: sometimes we need to redig the wells, and rediscover the pathways that those who have gone before us have found, have connected them with Jesus. This could be kind of giants of the faith. This could be kind of devotional guides or walking with Christ guides that have just restarted. Every so often, my father-in-law buys me a book that I have to be really careful not to kind of read too much into it, as to what he thinks of my spiritual state. The one he bought me a few years ago was called The Indwelling Life of Christ, and it's really good. It's clearly what he thought I needed, but no, I don't know that. But the Indwelling Life of Christ, and these insights that these giants of the faith have. You could go to Watchman Nee, The Normal Christian Life, T. Austin Sparks, many others have written on them, and they have discovered this same truth, that it's from their connection with God that they live, and many of them are so much more practical than we expect, and it can kind of put us off reading them until we realize that they came to terms with the fact that they were jars of clay, and that they needed practical help in learning these things. Also, these things can be very, very practical. One of the things Jesus says in the same place, where in John 15, where he's talking about the vine and the branches, he says, if you obey my commandments, you will abide in my love. This is my commandment, that you love one another. Sometimes we discover a new connection with Jesus by loving people that we find really difficult to love, or putting ourselves out there to love other people. This is my commandment, that you love one another. And it can be that practical, the things that Jesus leads us into. Just remember, though, that it's our first love that leads to those first works. Just going back to what I shared 10 months ago from Revelation, we actually spent some weeks in it, didn't we, with different speakers, that Jesus said you've left your first love. And he says, return to that first love and those first works. And they are completely interconnected. First love of God and for one another, and the works that leads to and that flow into each other. So there we go. So I'm nearly done now. The last takeaway is this. Remember where the river goes in Ezekiel's vision. It doesn't just fill the temple and all the priests who are fortunate enough to be there. The river, this is part of the wider purposes and plan of God. It's not only for those who know him, that the river is part of the purpose that God has for this world. If we are connected to Jesus, we have become walking, talking fountains of the very life of God, just like Jesus was when he walked on this earth. Now, we hold this treasure in jars of clay. I keep saying that. But we are, in many respects, we are walking conduits of the life of God into the circumstances where we are. And God's heart is that his river of life flows to some of the nastiest, saltiest, deadest places of this world that are least conducive to life that you can imagine. Okay, so don't be surprised. Don't be surprised if God leads you to some of those places. It's not a mistake that God is making. It's his plan and purpose for you and for this world. That this river should flow to the Dead Sea where nothing can grow and bring life. And it might seem totally God-forsaken to you, but the river flows there. And what I don't want people to do is walk away and just try to let the river flow. My encouragement this morning is that you look for it. Look for it. Expect it. Expect to find this river of life in the deadest possible places. Dave Valent shared, I think it was last week or the week before. No, it was last week, about how he's a police officer, and I can only imagine what that leads him to. I'm a school teacher, and I know that others here are school teachers. But I mean, these are kind of headline examples. It might be the neighbours you meet in the corridor or across the road. It might be the mums you speak to outside the school gates. It might be people you meet at the library. That God will lead us. Getting us into these places, if we're walking with God, is not the problem, but we need to look for that river of life. Okay. To give you an example, on Tuesday, I walked into school. I won't go into the detail. I have with my house group, but I'm not going to go into details. But there was something that had come completely from left field that impacted the whole school hugely from the get-go. I didn't know about it because I'd not checked my emails at 11 o'clock at night the night before. But and suddenly you walk into what you expect to be a normal day, and the whole school is being rocked by something that they didn't see coming and couldn't have done. And I'm learning slowly to say, Jesus, Jesus, your river flows here. Show me. Oh dear, sorry. Show me connect me right now. Again, reconnect me if I've been disconnected. But I'm looking for that river, Lord, and I believe it flows here. I believe it flows here, and I expect to see it. And he's there. He's there in those most difficult places. And we can look for that. It can be difficult family circumstances. It could just be times where we go through difficulties. I'm going to have an MRI scan in about 4 or 5 weeks for a fairly humdrum hearing problem. It's nothing too serious, but I'm a bit claustrophobic, and I'm going to have to sit in a strange box for 45 minutes listening to loud mechanical noises. But I'm expecting the river to be there, welling up, bringing God's peace, and he's everywhere. He's absolutely everywhere. There's nowhere we can go that he isn't there. The psalmist writes, doesn't he? You know, I can make my bed in Sheol and you're there. You can, even if we wanted to, we can't escape his presence, but we can expect his life-changing power of God to be there, and to look for it and to expect it. So last thing now. Sometimes it means moving on. I'm not saying that there's a time to stay and there's a time to go, but there's almost anywhere we go. Read Genesis chapter 26. You've got Isaac. His father has recently died, Abraham, and he goes to one place and he digs a well, and everyone around him kind of see it, and they all get jealous, and they basically put him in a situation where he has to fight or leave. So he calls the well Strife, and leaves, and he goes somewhere else, and he digs another well, and the same thing happens, and he has to leave again, and he names that well Hate. It's a funny thing to name a well, isn't it? And this can happen. Sometimes we bring the life of God, and it transforms a place, and people get jealous, and we end up being kicked out of it, basically, or moved on, or we face a choice: do I fight, or and there's a time to stay and there's a time to leave. And I'm not, we need God's understanding in that. And then he goes somewhere else and he digs again. He digs and he finds water again, and then he does it again. And you kind of get this feeling that it wouldn't matter where Isaac dug a hole, there would be water. He could dig it in the middle of the Negev desert or the Sahara. Wherever he went, God's faithfulness followed him, and we can look for that and trust that God will bring that to pass. To look for it and expect it in our lives and in these places. So.